I was putting away the groceries into the refrigerator, and a friend of mine was visiting me. And as I was putting the perishables into the fridge, I took out the old yogurt kegs and put the new yogurt containers in back and then the old ones in front. It's the way I was used to do it. But this surprised my friend. He commented about it. I thought everybody did that. Little things that you do now in the belief that tomorrow will come and that you will be here when tomorrow arrives. There was an old expression that, putting away money for a rainy day. Well, rainy days do come. We've had major depressions ever since revolutionary days. They've occurred since the late 1700s, roughly every 60 years. Let's see, the last one was in 1930s, early 30s. Depressions are bad times that last for several years. The Great Depression that began in 1929 lasted until the beginning of World War II. And that was a little bit longer than most regular depressions. But we had the government trying to help by fixing prices, controlling industries with a National Recovery Act, making it illegal to own gold, restricting international trade, raising taxes, as we plunged into the depths of depression. And probably the federal government will make the same mistakes again in our next depression. But you, if you're well educated, are not a helpless piece of dust blown by every puff of wind. If you act, your future can be at least a little bit more in your control. Start saving some cash. Make yourself a little bit more indispensable to your employer so that they can't live without you. Train in some other field so that if your job disappears, when I'm 80 years old, I still want to be planting fruit trees. How many people have you met who have majored in college in philosophy? It's not the all-time major favorite of people nowadays. You know, a lot of people who've read philosophy books. Chances are your bookshelves are not overflowing with philosophy books. Philosophy. Blech, you think. Some stuffy old academic enterprise, mostly the muttering of old Greeks wearing togas. Philosophy. Blech, you think. What has it got to say to me? Well, I've got a philosophy book right here. I picked it up last night off the shelf. It's by Will Durant, called The Pleasures of Philosophy. I bought it in some used bookstore or some library sale a time ago, but I've never opened it before last night. And I bought it because Will Durant is a very famous name as an author. He's written The Story of Civilization, so I think with 11 volumes. But The Pleasures of Philosophy is the title? Huh! That sounded peculiar, like the pleasures of a root canal or the pleasures and delights of an IRS audit. Thumbing through the table of contents in this Pleasures of Philosophy book was a real surprise with some of the topics that are listed here. not all of it is dull. One, is man a machine? Or why do we love? You got the answer to that one? Or differences of character with subtopics of individual instincts, racial instincts, societal instincts. Another one on women and genius. Another on the evolution of marriage, on having babies. There are 3 sections on beauty. And even from the titles in the table of contents, you can learn something. The titles are primary beauty, persons, secondary beauty, nature, and tertiary beauty, art. And have you ever thought of beauty that way? Durant defines philosophy as total perspective, as mind overspreading life and forging chaos into unity. Philosophy is more than just learning little bits of isolated information like what does the word tertiary mean. All things come together in a true study of philosophy. As Durant pointed out, all questions that vitally affect the worth and significance of human life, that's philosophy. Then in the table of contents, he looks at the lessons of history. How often in your schooling and you've studied history, but how often has the teacher talked about the lessons we can learn from history? Then he talks about the destiny of civilization, or liquor and liberty, or is democracy a failure? From Confucius to Christ, and finally, on the topics of life and death, he covers childhood, youth, middle age, and death. That's not bad for a 400-page book with those span of topics. The Pleasure of Philosophy by Will Durant. If you learned something by looking at even part of the table of contents, what would happen if you read the book? We must discover our human nature. Human nature is not something that you go out and invent. Discovering who we are. Is there anything more important as an educational objective? Finding out where we fit in the scheme of things. Is there any more challenging task than that? At the local university, or at least around here, you pay something like $70 a unit. That's over $200 for a regular 3-unit course. What kind of knowledge would you like to buy for $200 plus a course? At most universities, you can study the life cycle of the banana slug, or the future perfect tense forms of French verbs, or how to use word perfect on a computer. But how those topics pale in comparison with finding out where we fit in the world. Well, where do we find out about our own natures? Where do we find out about our destiny? You get different answers, I guess, depending on who you listen to. If you listen to Houston Baker of the University of Pennsylvania, he'll tell you that reading is an oppressive technology. And as was reported in Forbes magazine, Baker tells us we gotta listen to the oral culture through our rap groups like the NWA, which stands for Niggers with Attitudes. And the NWA sings in one of their songs how to kill, or what's great about killing policemen. But I like reading. Sorry, Mr. Baker. I'm only a clown on a local television station. I'm not a nationally known black academic. But somehow or another, I don't feel oppressed by reading. Oh, the things that I have learned from the printed word. Here's some volumes that are some of my favorites that I've read. Most of these I've read more than once. A play, my favorite play, A Man for All Seasons by Robert Bolt. Part of the life of Sir Thomas More, where he's a man who found out where he must stand in life and how he must come to die. Or the one that's been on the national bestseller list for a long time, M. Scott Peck's A Road Less Traveled. I've read it probably more than almost any other book. It's the nature of life and the role of suffering in it. A third of my fourth books, the Bible. Here's the Jerusalem Bible, which I've read several times. Now, how in a dozen words do I describe the Bible? How about this? It's a chronicle of the screw-ups of mankind and what God has and can do with those screw-ups, with us. A fourth one, favorite author, Abraham Maslow. He's written several books. Here's a picture of him in back. He talks about the nature, from a psychological point of view, of healthy individuals, rather than the ones that are all screwed up one way or another. He looks at what it means to be authentic, as he calls it. Those are just four of the books that are my favorites. There are many more that can lead us to discover what is our true and authentic human nature. What noise are you making, Opus? You wake me up. What are you sitting on? You sitting on eggs or something? Opus, you're a boy bird. You're not supposed to sit on things like that. What are you sitting on? Oh no. Oh no, I'm a failure as a father. Opus, you're sitting on candy. Piles and piles of Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, Tootsie Rolls, Flavor Rolls, dots, or here's some dots. Oh, Opus, you silly. Oh, it's going to come open. Do you know about sugar? Opus, do you know about sugar? You know, every parent, there's things that every parent should tell their children. And I move the ball out of the way. I can't see you in the eyes then. Let me tell you about sugar. I was reading this book here, right by the bed here, and it's entitled Linus Pauling, How to Live Longer and Feel Better. Yeah. And it says stuff about that, you know. And it's not the usual junk that you hear about. Move the ball out of my eyes. The stuff that you hear about it regularly. But there's... What do you mean, how to live long and feel better? You feel better when you're eating candy, you tell me, huh? Well, Opus, I don't think you're in touch with your insides. You know what? Because when you eat candy, sometimes you get whiny and everything. And, you know, when you're a little kid like you are, you know, I've heard you some afternoons when I'm putting you down for a nap, and you say, I don't want to take a nap. I'm not tired. You're not in touch with your insides for real, because you just fall right asleep when I put you down for a nap. So, sugar, like all the candy you're sitting on there, it's not just that it'll make you fat, you know, and you're a little rummy tum-tum, or it'll wreck your moods. There's something more important I've got to tell you about that Linus Pauling talked about in his book, which is, surprisingly, heart attacks, cholesterol, and its link to sugar. It's not so much the meat and eggs, but sugar for cholesterol. They did a study of Jews that went from Yemen to Israel. And those that were there just a short time, like under 10 years, they had low heart attacks. But the Jews that had gone from Yemen to Israel, that had been there a long time, had high heart attacks. And the difference? In Yemen, they had lots of animal fats to eat. But they had low heart attacks. But they also had low sugar. And when they moved to Israel, they had a diet like the United States with high sugar, and they started dropping like flies. They had another study that Mr. Pauling talks about, and it was from some of the tribes in Eastern Africa. And they live mostly on meat and milk, and that is high fat. But very, very little heart attacks. Until that meat and milk got the influence of our Western civilization cultures of sugar. And then as the sugar has increased, so the heart attacks have gone up. Why? You ask me why? Well, one of the ways it was explained was that the cholesterol we eat doesn't just go into the bloodstream as cholesterol in our bloodstream. But the sugar we eat, part of it, you know, from the sugar bowl or from the candy you're sitting on, is turned into what's called acetate. And acetate is one of acetate is one of the precursors of cholesterol that's produced in our liver, in our bodies. So there's scientific reasons besides the studies that have been done. Oh, so I'm going to turn off the light, and I don't know what we're going to do with all of that candy. Maybe we'll split it later. Night, night. H.G. Wells has written, "The future is a race between education and catastrophe." I am lying here. I lie here waiting for me to magically appear on the camera and the screen. Did you know that as I lay here waiting to have the camera lay its eye on me, I was thinking of the most confusing set of verbs in the English language. I have lain in bed several mornings thinking about how to explain this, how to lay it out for you. And what are those verbs? Lie and lay. It is the verb lie, to recline, like this, that causes the most problems. 90% of the problems are there. Look, I'm lying here right now. I lie here, waiting to think how to explain it to you. It's the past tense of to lie, to recline, that gives all the problems. Today I lie here. Last night I lay in bed. Last night I lay in bed. Just say that over and over again. That's the correct words. You don't, I laid in bed. You don't laid in bed or laid down or anything like that. No. You lay eggs in bed if you like. Or you lay railroad track in your backyard. But if you gotta, when you talk about laid, you laid something. You laid eggs. You laid something down, or you laid something aside. A direct object is what it's called. In the past tense, laid, I laid something, a direct object. You don't laid in bed, and you don't lied in bed. I lied in bed. Oh no. Last night I lay in bed. Come to think of it, it was 2 days ago when I actually heard a friend of mine say, I lied in bed. Maybe he meant that he wasn't telling his wife the truth. In a nutshell, the verb lie is present tense, and its past tense is lay, and its past participle, lain. Hans Kung, one of the most famous living theologians, wrote in his book entitled Signposts for the Future, in the last resort, in God's sight, achievements are simply not important. War, famine, disease. These three are the friends of death, brought to you by the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The newspapers have been full of Bosnia. The radios used to tell of starvation in Ethiopia, Cambodia on television. But how much have you heard? How much have you heard about the Sudan? The Sudan. Could you point it out on a map? It's in Africa. If I show you a map, this National Geographic map, can you pick it out? It's the largest country in land area in Africa. Here it is. And now our story of murder, as was detailed in the September 1995 issue of the magazine First Things. In the 6th century, Christianity came to the Sudan. What are called the fabled Nubian kingdoms arose. Beautiful cities with impressive cathedrals. In later centuries, the Muslims came with sword and repeatedly attempted to conquer the country. The Nubian kingdoms of the north were finally overrun in the 14th century. If you were a Christian in the north, you either fled to the south or were killed or enslaved. So in the 14th century, the Sudan looked something like this. And for centuries, the remnant in the south, since the 14th century, has withstood the military pressure from the north and has frustrated its attempts to make the entire country Islamic. Under British colonial rule, things remained fairly stable until the end of World War II. Then the history of centuries in the Sudan became the history of decades ago, as Islamization, Arabization, and slavery pushed their way south. In 1983, Islamic fundamentalism forced the Islamic Orthodox law upon the South. One eyewitness reported, "Soon I began seeing the results of people with arms and legs cut off for violating Orthodox Islamic law." As First Things reported, ghost houses appeared, and since 1989, not decades ago, where there is whipping and clubbing and electric shock and rape and burning with hot irons and mock executions. It wasn't just centuries ago. It wasn't just after World War II. In 1993, a retired brigadier general was chained to the bars of his cell window, chained by his wrists and his testicles. Imagine being that way for 2 minutes, hanging that way for hours. Women in the South, tens of thousands, were raped. Their children were taken and forced to convert to Islam. A human rights organization has noted mounting evidence of the crucifixion of all the males in entire villages. In 1993, State Department report was that the government of Sudan routinely steal women and children. Some of the women and children are kept as wives. Others are shipped north where they perform forced labor or are exported to Libya. The present Islamic regime in the Sudan allows for the crucifixion of children as young as 7 years